and that's the bottom line. What? Cause Stone Cold said so. 1, 2.
There's 2 now.
It doesn't matter if the Rock has the three.
Newsflash, you pencil neck geeks! If I wanted to hear your opinions, I would turn on TLC and watch reruns of my 600-pound life. So shut up!
Shut up, bitch! Oh my God!
You could ask me anything. You could have asked me about AEW.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wrasslin Report. I'm your host, Tommy Maloney, and this is episode 1. Here goes nothing. So, you saw the title. You probably read the description, and if you didn't, don't worry, I'm going to get into it. But this is the Wrasslin Report, and we're going to be talking all about pro wrestling. No, not real wrestling. No, not wrestling that maybe you did in high school or you watched one of your friends compete in high school. No, we're talking about... Dare I say it? Screw it, I'm just going to say it. We're talking about fake wrestling today, but we're not actually going to be discussing WWE. And I know that's what most people know, that's what they're familiar with or they've heard of, but we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be discussing AEW or All Elite Wrestling, and we're mainly going to be showcasing Dynamite, which is their weekly show, kind of like Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown is for WWE. So AEW is a new up-and-coming wrestling promotion that debuted, I believe, on January 1st, 2019. That's when it was founded. They've had a couple shows throughout 2019, and then they started their weekly show Dynamite in October of 2019, and it has just taken over. This past year, it has blown up. It's probably the closest thing to competition that WWE has had since 2001 when WCW went out of business. So before I even delve into anything AEW related, I kind of figured that it would probably be beneficial if we took this first episode to just gloss over the fundamentals of pro wrestling. I want to get everybody on the same page before I actually start digging into some of the matches, some of the storylines, before getting into shows. I want everybody to understand what wrestling is. I'm not asking you to be a fan. I'm not asking you to understand it immediately. What I want, though, is for you to have a brief understanding of why someone, over the age of 13 years old would be interested in pro wrestling, why they would watch it. And the best part about this podcast is that it's literally designed for people like you listening right now. If you've never watched wrestling before, you've been interested in it, you have that one friend that is an adult and is like a fanatic, watches it all the time, won't stop talking about it. This podcast is literally for you. It's to help you understand that one friend that you have that still watches wrestling. And who knows, maybe by the end of this podcast, you'll be watching along with your friend. That's my goal anyways. Hopefully I'm going to turn out some new wrestling fans with this podcast, but it's mainly just about helping you understand the art of it. It really is an art form if you really think about it. And I know that sounds crazy to you right now because you just think it's fake shit. But over time, hopefully I can shift your mindset about the business itself. So I am going to begin by asking the simplest yet most vital question I could ask a new wrestling fan. What is wrestling? Wrestling is the craziest, the stupidest, the most unbelievably weird yet amazing thing ever created, if you ask me. Wrestling is out there. It is. And I want to let you know right now that wrestling doesn't work unless you work with it. It's all about mindset. And if you go into it saying, well, it's fake, then you're not going to like it. I'm telling you right now, you have to go in with an open mind or else you are not going to enjoy it at all. I promise you. You have to have an open mind. I always think of it like this. We all love movies, right? We go to the theater because it's fun. We go with our friends to experience something that helps us. It helps us suspend our disbelief a little bit. We know that movies are not real, but we like to dive into these fantasy worlds. And the filmmakers and actors that are involved in movies, they're not asking you to believe in what they're doing is real. They're asking you to let yourself fade away into it. They're asking you to just invest in the stories that they're telling. It is literally no different than wrestling. I think the reason it's harder to process and accept with wrestling is the fact that they try to present it as a sport. And I know a lot of people within the business would consider it a sport, and I think that holds the business back. I wish people would stop considering it a sport, because it's not. There's two guys in the ring. They're not actually trying to hurt each other. They're not actually trying to beat each other and win. What they're trying to do is put on the best show that they possibly can and tell a story. There's a great video on YouTube that really explained wrestling well, and I'm going to just talk about it very briefly. If you've never seen this video called Wrestling Isn't Wrestling on YouTube, go search it right now. I promise you it's going to help you understand it better. It's got a lot of big names in it. I think Josh Peck is involved. There's a lot of celebrities in the video. It's a really good video. And it talks about how wrestling isn't a wrestling show. It's a show about a wrestling show. It's entertainment. At the core of wrestling, it's entertainment. It's a show. It's like live theater, sports, comic books, mythology, and Shakespeare all rolled into one ball of just crazy entertainment extravaganza. It's ridiculous. And one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Chris Jericho, said, I remember him saying this, if William Shakespeare was alive today, he would not be writing plays. He'd be writing pro wrestling shows. Because this is essentially, I think, the closest thing to that in the modern times, because it's like purposely ridiculous and it knows that it's ridiculous, but people still dig it because it's self-aware. I am struggling right now to find the words to help describe why pro wrestling is interesting. I talked how it's purposely ridiculous and it's self-aware and knows what it is, and I think that's why some people enjoy it. But I have a hard time building that bridge between people who love it and people who don't understand it, because I don't really know when that transition was for me, when I knew I loved it. But I know for sure that I view wrestling a lot differently now that I'm an adult compared to when I was a kid. I think a lot of people watch wrestling as a kid. This is what happens. They start watching wrestling as a kid, and then they start to grow up and they find out that it's fake. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, screw it, it's fake. I'm not watching this anymore. It's like Santa Claus. Once they find out the truth, it's ruined. And it's not fun anymore, so they just quit. It's like, well, good game. You know what I mean? It's over. But it wasn't like that for me. Deep down, I almost always knew it was fake, even when I was a kid. I kind of always knew it was fake, but I didn't want to accept it and believe that it was fake, so I pretended that it was real, and I told myself it was real, even though deep down I knew the truth. But even once I got older, and I started diving into, like, behind the scenes, and I started understanding what goes into the production of a wrestling show and really what it is, it didn't kill my love for it as a fan. And if anything, it really only made me more of a fan. It only made me respect it even more. And I know that sounds weird. I know it sounds odd, but there's a strange, like, switch. Like, it just happens when you stop watching as what wrestling fans call a casual fan. When you're a kid, you're a casual fan. You casually watch it, you cheer for the good guys, and you boo the bad guys. But then once you get older, you start to understand how much damn talent it takes to be a bad guy. Or even better yet, how much talent it takes to be a hero. I think it's probably even harder to make people like you than get people to not like you. And once you start looking at it from this perspective, from like a behind the scenes, like if you put yourselves in the shoes of a wrestler, and Vince McMahon, who owns WWE, tells you, go out there and cut a promo. He's going to give you a live microphone and he's going to tell you, sell this match, sell this angle, and make them hate you and make them want to cheer for the other guy. What would you do? This is where it starts to become fun to look at it from this point of view. You start to respect the wrestlers and how hard this actually is. And once you find out that what they're bumping on, the ring, is only has a quarter of an inch of padding, and underneath that it's just pure plywood, you start to respect it even more, and you realize, okay, wow, they really are putting their bodies on the line. Even if they're not trying to hurt each other, they're legitimately destroying their bodies for our entertainment. And you start to just look at that and go, wow, like, that's pretty cool. It's ridiculous, it's crazy, but there's a certain satisfaction and admiration you get out of that you never really saw as a kid. Maybe this is what it was for me. I do remember watching a documentary on a wrestler called CM Punk, who worked his way up from the independent scene and made it to WWE. And he talked about how hard it was for him to, like, get noticed by the land of giants, because that's what WWE is. They don't really look, or at least they didn't used to look at smaller guys underneath, like 6 feet tall, 250, 260 pounds. If you were underneath that and you were below what they would consider, a giant or big, you weren't considered anything special or something they would be interested in. So he talked about how tough it was in real life. Like, he was shooting, which means he's talking about it for real behind the scenes. He talked about how difficult it was to, get eyes on him, and how he enjoys playing a heel or a bad guy better than he does a babyface or a good guy. And it's like, holy shit, there's like an entire part of wrestling you don't even realize is there as a kid. You just cheer the good guys and boo the bad guys because you just think they are that way. But no, once you become an adult, you see that this is an art form. It's a form of entertainment, and it takes real skill, like legitimate talent, to pull this off. And you start to get into it more, and you start to understand why they do what they do, and you start to become more of a hardcore fan. You become more of a purist. So then when you see somebody like, for example, let's take Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the biggest movie star in the world today, right? Everybody knows The Rock. How he broke out into becoming a celebrity, how everybody knew him originally, was through pro wrestling. He was a huge star in the WWE. And when people saw how good he was on the microphone, saying stuff like, if you smell what The Rock is cooking, and it doesn't matter what you think. And he had all these catchphrases that got the crowd to go crazy, just go wild for him. And all he had to do was say these, like, stupid, like, little catchphrases. But it's because of the way he said it and how charismatic he is as a person. Like, only he would be able to pull that off. And you realize how special he is, and like, you appreciate the fact that he's a star a lot more as an adult. And that's the kind of stuff you see in wrestling that you wouldn't as a kid. And I feel like this is just kind of how it starts. This is how it begins for you to grow as a fan, and you start to move on from just like, oh yeah, it's fake, it sucks. And you start to realize, like, yeah, okay, like, yeah, it's not, they're not like trying to hurt each other. They're not like actually trying to beat each other and win. But I respect what they're doing. They're trying to tell a story based on two larger than life characters that could never exist in real life. It's like comic books come to life. It's like two over the top personalities just clashing in the flesh. And it's just, you see it from a different light. You see it in a different perspective. And you're like, okay, this might be cooler. It might be more interesting than I originally thought. And like I said, if you're not resonating with what I'm saying, like, I'm not expecting you to understand it yet. It takes time to kind of mold into a wrestling fan, like a true wrestling fan. And it's not everybody's cup of tea. It never will be. But if you're not fully on board with what I'm saying yet, and you're not like feeling anything, and you don't like understand what I'm saying, that's completely okay. I'm just trying to help explain my story of how I transitioned from becoming just a kid who cheers the good guys and boos the bad guys into becoming more of a hardcore wrestling fan that appreciates the craft and just appreciates the business more than I used to. All I really want for you to take away from this first episode is to see wrestling in a different way than you did before. I'm kind of shining a light on it in a different angle that you've never probably seen it before. You've probably just assumed it's just, you know, it's like Santa Claus. It's a lie, and then once you figure it out, it's like, well, it's over. But it's not over. Like, it only gets better. That's what I'm saying. It's like, yes, it's weird, and yes, it takes time, but once you get there, and I promise you, once you get there, you're never going back. It's the best thing in the world. I swear to God. So now that I've kind of broken down the appeal of pro wrestling as an adult to you, I kind of want to discuss why I'm going to be talking about AEW or All Elite Wrestling rather than the WWE. Okay, so I was born in 1999, right in the midst of what most people would consider the greatest era of wrestling ever, the Attitude Era. Unfortunately, I was too young and, like, I don't remember any of it, of course, because it ended, the Attitude Era, I believe, ended in 2001. Or 2002. I think it was 2001. But I was too young to experience the Attitude Era. I grew up in what was called the Ruthless Aggression Era, which was, you know, the 2000s, mainly the 2000s. And I think the Ruthless Aggression Era was the best blend of everything. Because back in the day, the actual in-ring stuff, like the matches were not thought about primarily. Like, they weren't like the main thing that you worried about. The main thing people worried about was telling a story. And yes, I do think that character work and promos and, you know, telling a story is the most important thing you could do in wrestling. But back in the day, they really did not put much thought into creating an actually good match, you know, athletically. Nowadays, it's much more, they put much more thought and emphasis into the actual match rather than the storytelling. And I think that's why wrestling is not nearly as popular as it used to be. But I grew up kind of in the middle. It was like the mid-ground between what wrestling used to be and what wrestling is now. It was the Ruthless Aggression Era. And it was a really great blend between good matches and good storytelling with good characters. It was the best of both worlds. But as I've gotten older, I've watched, you know, the chairman of WWE, Vince McMahon, I've watched him get older. And I've watched his brain deteriorate. And I've watched him become more and more out of touch with his audience. The WWE has such an awful relationship with their fans. They don't listen to them. They don't understand them anymore. They don't know what they want. It's just, the product nowadays is very much a shell of what it used to be. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And I think that's why every single year, and I mean this, every single year, they lose viewers. Its viewership is going down every single year. And they used to get, like, you know, 7.6 and 7 point something million every single week for Monday Night Raw back in, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, they're lucky to get 2 million. It's like, it's crazy how far it's fallen. But I truly believe it's because over the years, the larger-than-life characters and personas have kind of faded away, and it's become much more based around the in-ring quality of matches, which I think is cool. I think it's awesome, but they're forgetting about what makes wrestling appealing to the mass audience. It's like they're trying to serve a cake, but it's just the icing. There's no foundation of what makes the cake the cake. They're just, you know, they're basically just giving the toppings and what makes it look pretty, but they're not providing what people really want to see. And they're forgetting what the core foundation of wrestling is. And I think that's why it's fallen so far. And that is where AEW comes in. So All Elite Wrestling is basically a massive, super independent wrestling company that somehow managed to get itself on TNT television. I think it's because owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tony Khan, who's like a multi-billionaire, he's even richer than Vince McMahon, he owns the company. He invested in it, and basically it's run by him and 4 or 5 of these guys from the independents. They call themselves the Elite, and they're basically the rebels of pro wrestling. Instead of conforming to what almost everyone does, and they sell out and go to WWE, you know, parenthetically, they didn't. they stayed and they resisted and they said, well, I think we would do better in the independents rather than going to the big leagues. They made more money in the independents. They were able to do what they wanted without, being creatively ruined, because once you go to WWE, they creatively control everything that you do. Everything that you do. The promos you cut, the matches you do, like everything that you do in WWE, they own it. They completely control you. While as in the indies, you're kind of more of your own boss. You do your own thing. You're much more of an artist when you're on your own. You're given creative freedom as a wrestler. And I think that's why the Elite decided to stay in the indies and resist. And because of that, they got a lot of eyes on them. And they even started a YouTube channel called Being the Elite. And it started as like this vlogging channel where it's just them traveling. But now it's like it's like a show. They have their own storylines in there, and they showcase wrestlers from AEW to kind of get them more closer connected with the audience, and kind of it's a place for them to showcase their personalities. And I think that's why AEW is winning. That's why they're becoming more and more popular. It's because they understand the youth. They understand young people and what they want. They give them a YouTube show. Young people love YouTube. They give wrestlers creative freedom to do what they want. That way, they're not like robots coming out just cutting these ridiculously scripted and terrible sounding promos, and instead they're grabbing a microphone and sounding like humans. It's just, they have much more of a natural and modern take and approach to wrestling than WWE does. The WWE's formula is so unbelievably stale and outdated, and I think AEW they understand what has to be done to create a good wrestling show in the modern era. And that's why they're starting to explode. And this company, now known as All Elite Wrestling, that is ran by the Elite, is becoming an empire. They took a chance. They didn't go to the big leagues. Instead, they started their own company. It got on television, and now this is probably the biggest competition WWE has had in like 20 years. It's crazy. And I personally do not think that AEW Dynamite is a perfect wrestling show. There's many flaws to it, but I definitely think it's the best wrestling show going today. And I think that they have a much better presentation than WWE does. I think they understand what fans want. They have a better relationship with their audience, and that is the key to success in any business, really, even outside of wrestling. So, yeah. I'll be reviewing AEW Dynamite every week. Get hyped. And I will kind of be helping you. I'll be easing you into it. I'll be helping you understand certain things. I'll be explaining different things. I'm definitely going to be taking the approach as if you've never watched wrestling before. Don't you worry about that. I'm definitely going to help you get into this as best as I can. And I think you will. I really think you will. It's a good show. After my explanation in episode 1 of what wrestling is, you can go into this with a different mindset than you might have originally thought. And I think people are going to enjoy it. And if you don't, well, then I tried. And, that's all you really can do is you can try. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very, very much for tuning in for the very first episode of the Wrasslin Report. I am your host, Tommy Maloney. You can catch me every single week reviewing Dynamite right here on YouTube. Stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is just the beginning. I promise you we have a lot more to cover, a lot more to get into, and I'm hoping you will get into it alongside me. So on that note, thank you very much, everybody, and I will catch you next time for episode 2. Adios.